The emergency lights cast an eerie red glow throughout the engineering section of the interstellar transport vessel Harmony's Edge. Marcus Chen wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of his grease-stained hand, leaving another dark smudge across his already dirty face. The massive ship groaned around him, its hull plates creaking under the stress of unbalanced power distribution. He had been working alone for the past 18 hours, trying to repair the cascade failure that had crippled their faster-than-light drive system. The rest of the engineering crew had evacuated to the upper decks when the radiation warnings started blaring. Standard protocol demanded that all non-essential personnel retreat to the shielded passenger compartments during a core breach scenario, but Marcus had volunteered to stay behind. Someone needed to fix the problem, and as the senior human engineer aboard the ship, he felt it was his responsibility. The Harmony's Edge was a joint venture between Earth and the Galactic Cooperation Council, carrying delegates from 12 different species to the Peace Summit on Kepler 442b. The ship's crew was equally diverse, with engineers and technicians from various worlds working together to maintain the complex hybrid technology that made interstellar travel possible. Most of the alien crew members had followed evacuation procedures to the letter, their risk-averse cultures prioritizing safety over rapid repairs. Marcus crawled through a maintenance tunnel that would have been impossible for the larger Koroth engineers to navigate. His human size and flexibility had always been an advantage in tight spaces. Though his colleagues often joked that humans were the only species crazy enough to crawl into potentially lethal areas just to fix something. The joke felt less funny now, as Geiger counter readings climbed steadily on his suit's display. The tunnel opened into a restricted section of the engineering bay that Marcus had never accessed before. His headlamp illuminated banks of unfamiliar equipment, their surfaces covered in warning labels written in multiple languages. The universal symbols for danger, radiation, and forbidden access covered nearly every surface. This was clearly some kind of emergency system, separate from the main engineering controls he was familiar with. As Marcus oriented himself in the cramped space, he noticed that the radiation readings on his suit had actually decreased. Whatever shielding surrounded this area was more effective than the standard engineering compartments. He began examining the equipment, looking for any connection to the failed drive system. His human curiosity overrode the clearly posted warnings as he studied the alien technology. Most of the control panels displayed text in Zephyrian script, which Marcus could read thanks to his mandatory xenolinguistics training. The labels spoke of emergency power redistribution, crisis response protocol, and last resort activation. One console in particular caught his attention. It was smaller than the others, with a simple interface consisting of just a few status lights and a single large switch protected by a clear safety cover. Marcus activated his suit's translation software and aimed it at the console. The text that appeared on his display made him pause. Terran Protocol Override, authorization required. Warning, activation may result in total system instability. Use only when all conventional repair methods have failed. A Terran protocol? Marcus had never heard of such a thing. The ship's primary systems were based on Corvani fusion technology, with Zephyrian navigation computers and Altarian environmental controls. Human contributions to the ship's design had been limited to auxiliary systems and some specialized manufacturing components. The idea that there was a human-designed emergency protocol hidden away in this restricted section seemed impossible. He tried to access the console's information database, but it required biometric authentication. When Marcus placed his hand on the scanner, it immediately recognized his human DNA signature and granted access. The revelation that followed left him stunned. The console documentation explained that during the ship's construction, human engineers had insisted on installing a backup system that could override all other ship functions in extreme emergencies. The other species had reluctantly agreed to include the system, but only if it was sealed away and clearly marked as dangerous. The alien engineers had been horrified by the human approach to emergency protocols. Where other species built safety systems designed to shut down and protect equipment during failures, humans had designed a system that would push every component beyond its normal operational limits to maintain basic functionality. According to the documentation, the Terran Protocol override would reroute all available power through unshielded conduits, disable safety limiters on the reactor core, and force the faster-than-light drive to operate at dangerous energy levels. The system was designed to give the ship enough power and mobility to reach the nearest safe harbor, but at the cost of potentially catastrophic component failures. Marcus checked his suit's communication system, trying to contact the bridge. The radiation interference was still too strong for clear transmission. He could hear fragments of worried conversations from the passenger decks, but nothing coherent. Time was running out. The ship's orbit was decaying, and without main engine power, they would soon enter the atmosphere of the gas giant they had been studying. Every rational part of Marcus's mind told him to retreat and find another solution. The warnings plastered around the emergency protocol were clear about the risks. But his human instincts rebelled against the idea of giving up when a potential solution was right in front of him. His species had not reached the stars by playing it safe and following every warning label. Marcus began studying the console more carefully, trying to understand exactly what would happen if he activated the Terran Protocol override. The system was elegant in its simplicity, designed by human engineers who understood that complex solutions often failed when they were needed most. It would essentially turn the entire ship into one massive, overclocked engine, sacrificing longevity for raw power output. The sound of metal grinding against metal echoed through the ship's hull, followed by a series of warning alarms. The structural stress was increasing as the ship's descent into the gas giant's gravity well accelerated. Marcus realized that he had perhaps minutes before the point of no return. Either he found a way to restore power to the engines, or everyone aboard the Harmony's Edge would die in the crushing atmosphere below. Marcus's hands hovered over the safety cover protecting the activation switch. Every regulation, every safety protocol, every piece of training he had ever received told him not to touch it. But sometimes, being human meant ignoring the rules when lives were at stake. Marcus accessed the historical logs stored in the emergency console, hoping to understand why the other species had been so adamant about sealing away the human-designed system. What he discovered in the archived communications from the ship's construction phase painted a clear picture of the fundamental differences between human and alien approaches to crisis management. The first log entry was from Chief Engineer Vorthak, a Corvani specialist who had overseen the ship's power systems integration. His voice, translated through the universal communication protocols, carried a tone of barely controlled frustration. The human engineers continue to insist on installing their emergency override system despite our repeated explanations of why it violates basic safety principles. Their proposed solution involves deliberately removing safety limiters and operating critical systems at 200% of rated capacity. Another entry from Commander Zileth, the Zephyrian project coordinator, expressed similar concerns. We have run computational models on the human emergency protocol. In 67% of scenarios, activation results in complete system failure within 4 minutes. In 28% of scenarios, the ship suffers catastrophic structural damage. Only 5% of projections show successful implementation without major casualties. Marcus found himself grimacing as he read through the diplomatic exchanges that had followed. The alien engineers had presented their concerns in careful, measured language, emphasizing statistical analysis and risk assessment. The human response, led by engineer Sarah Rodriguez from Earth's Deep Space Division, had been characteristically direct. Sometimes you have to break a few eggs to make an omelet. Our philosophy is that a 5% chance of survival beats a 0% chance of survival. The cultural clash had been inevitable. The Corvani had evolved on a world where reckless behavior meant extinction. Their society built around careful planning and risk mitigation. The Zephyrians were mathematically minded beings who made decisions based on probability calculations and optimal outcomes. The Altarians were hive-minded creatures who instinctively avoided actions that could harm the collective. Humans, apparently, were the only species willing to gamble everything on a desperate chance. Marcus continued reading. Discovering that the compromise solution had been to install the Terran protocol override, but lock it away behind multiple safety barriers. The alien engineers had insisted on extensive warning labels, biometric locks, and physical isolation from the main engineering systems. They had also demanded that the system only be accessible to human personnel, arguing that no other species would be psychologically capable of making the decision to activate it. The final entry in the construction logs came from Dr. Elena Vasquez, the human psychologist who had served as cultural liaison during the project. The other species view our emergency protocols as either suicidal or insane. They cannot understand why we would design a system that intentionally risks destroying the very thing we are trying to save. What they fail to grasp is that humans have a unique relationship with controlled destruction. We break things to understand them. We risk everything to save what matters most. This isn't recklessness. It's calculated desperation. Marcus felt a chill as he realized the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. The entire ship's survival might depend on his willingness to embody the most dangerous aspects of human nature. He checked the ship's status again through his suit's limited connection to the main computer. The situation had deteriorated further in the few minutes he had spent reading the logs. The Harmony's Edge was now completely without main engine power. Emergency thrusters were firing sporadically, trying to maintain attitude control, but they were insufficient to counter the gas giant's gravitational pull. In the passenger compartments, automated systems were preparing for crash protocols that everyone knew would be useless against the crushing pressures and toxic atmosphere waiting below. Marcus tried once more to establish communication with the bridge. This time, he managed to connect with Captain Thresk, the ship's Zephyrian commander. The captain's voice was strained but professional as always. Engineer Chen, what is your status? We show multiple radiation warnings from your section. Captain, I've found a potential solution, Marcus replied, but it involves activating an emergency system that carries significant risks. I need authorization to proceed. There was a long pause before Captain Thresk responded. Are you referring to the sealed Terran protocol? Engineer Chen, our safety regulations explicitly forbid activation of that system except under the most extreme circumstances. Marcus looked around at the warning lights flashing throughout the emergency compartment. Sir, with respect, I think being 4 minutes away from atmospheric entry into a gas giant qualifies as extreme circumstances. Another pause. Marcus could hear hushed conversations in the background as the captain consulted with other bridge officers. Finally, Thresk's voice returned, heavier than before. Engineer Chen, the decision must be yours alone. Our species. We cannot authorize what our analysis suggests is tantamount to controlled self-destruction. If you believe the Terran protocol offers a genuine chance of survival, then human judgment must prevail. The communication channel went quiet, leaving Marcus alone with the weight of the decision. He understood now why the other species had insisted that only humans be able to activate the system. They had recognized something fundamental about human psychology that even Marcus had not fully grasped until this moment. Humans were uniquely willing to choose a dangerous chance over certain death. Marcus examined the activation procedure one more time. The process was surprisingly simple, requiring only that he lift the safety cover and flip the switch. The system would then automatically assess the ship's current status and implement the most aggressive power redistribution possible. There would be no going back once the sequence began. He thought about the passengers and crew members sheltering in the upper decks, representatives from a dozen worlds, scientists, diplomats, engineers, and explorers who had dedicated their lives to building bridges between species, all of them trusting that someone would find a way to bring them home safely. Marcus also thought about the statistics he had read in the construction logs. A 95% chance of catastrophic failure. Any rational being would consider those odds unacceptable. But humans had never been entirely rational beings. They were the species that had looked at the vast emptiness of space and decided to build rockets. They had stared into the face of the impossible and consistently chosen to try anyway. The ship shuddered violently as atmospheric drag began to affect its outer hull. Warning alarms throughout the vessel increased in intensity and frequency. Marcus realized that he was out of time for deliberation. The moment had arrived when action, any action, was better than paralysis. Marcus placed his hand on the safety cover protecting the activation switch. The metal was cold against his palm, and he could feel a slight vibration from the ship's struggling systems. Everything came down to this moment, this choice that embodied the fundamental difference between human courage and alien caution. He thought about Dr. Vasquez's words from the construction logs. Calculated desperation. That phrase perfectly captured what he was feeling now. This was not blind recklessness or suicidal impulse. This was a careful evaluation of terrible options and the conscious choice to embrace controlled chaos rather than accept inevitable defeat. Marcus lifted the safety cover with a soft click that seemed to echo through the emergency compartment. The activation switch sat before him, a simple piece of human engineering that represented everything his species stood for. The willingness to risk everything, the refusal to accept defeat, the stubborn insistence that there was always one more option, no matter how dangerous or unlikely. Time was measured now in seconds rather than minutes. Marcus could feel the ship's descent accelerating as the gas giant's atmosphere grew thicker around them. Soon, the hull would begin to buckle under pressure that would crush every living thing aboard. There would be no rescue, no miraculous intervention from some passing vessel. There was only the choice before him and the consequences that would follow. Marcus Chen, senior human engineer aboard the interstellar transport vessel Harmony's Edge, took a deep breath and made the choice that would define not just his fate, but the fate of everyone who had trusted him to find a way home. The effect was instantaneous and overwhelming. The emergency compartment erupted in blinding white light as power surged through systems that had been dormant for the ship's entire operational life. The gentle hum of normal operations was replaced by a deep, thrumming vibration that seemed to come from the ship's very bones. Marcus felt the deck plates beneath his feet grow warm as massive amounts of energy were redirected through conduits never designed to carry such loads. Warning alarms throughout the ship changed from the steady tone of general emergency to the rapid, urgent beeping of critical system overload. Marcus's suit display lit up with radiation warnings, temperature alerts, and structural stress notifications. The Terran protocol override was doing exactly what its designers had intended, turning the Harmony's Edge into a barely controlled explosion of directed energy. Through the ship's communication system, Marcus could hear the panicked voices of alien crew members as their carefully calibrated instruments went haywire. The Corvani chief engineer was shouting about power readings that exceeded the theoretical maximum output of their fusion reactors. The Zephyrian navigation officer reported that the ship's faster-than-light drive was attempting to initialize despite being in the gravity well of a massive celestial body. But beneath the chaos, Marcus could feel something changing. The ship's descent was slowing. The emergency thrusters, now operating at triple their normal power output, were finally providing enough force to counteract the gas giant's gravitational pull. The deck stopped vibrating with atmospheric turbulence as the Harmony's Edge clawed its way back toward stable orbit. Marcus monitored the override system's progress through the emergency console. The human-designed protocols were adapting in real time, making microsecond adjustments to power distribution based on changing conditions. Where alien engineering relied on predetermined safety parameters and careful calculations, the Terran system embraced controlled chaos. It was like watching a master craftsman work with unstable materials, constantly adjusting and compensating to achieve an impossible goal. The ship's main engines suddenly roared to life, their fusion chambers operating at energy levels that should have resulted in immediate containment failure. But the human engineers who had designed the override system had anticipated this scenario. They had built flexibility into every component, accepting that some parts would burn out or break down in exchange for keeping the critical systems functional long enough to reach safety. Captain Thresk's voice came through the communication system, filled with a mixture of awe and terror. Engineer Chen, our sensors show main engine power at 180% of maximum rated output. This should not be possible. Our containment systems are reading temperatures that exceed safe operational limits by factors we cannot calculate. Marcus smiled grimly as he watched the power distribution readouts. Captain, the human approach to engineering is a little different from standard Galactic Cooperation Council specifications. We build our systems to break in predictable ways rather than fail catastrophically. As if to illustrate his point, one of the secondary power conduits in Marcus's compartment suddenly exploded in a shower of sparks and plasma. The emergency system immediately rerouted power through alternate pathways, maintaining overall functionality while isolating the damaged component. It was exactly the kind of controlled failure that alien engineers found incomprehensible. The ship continued its climb away from the gas giant's atmosphere, gaining speed as the main engines reached previously impossible levels of output. Marcus watched the stress indicators on his display, knowing that they were running on borrowed time. The Terran protocol override was not designed for sustained operation. It was meant to provide just enough power and thrust to reach safety, burning out components in the process. Another explosion echoed through the ship, this time from somewhere in the main engineering section. Marcus could hear the Corvani engineering crew discussing evacuation procedures as their instruments registered power surges that violated everything they understood about safe reactor operation. But the human-designed system kept running, kept pushing, kept fighting against the laws of physics and probability. The ship's navigation computer suddenly announced successful escape from the gas giant's gravity well. They had achieved stable orbit and could now engage the faster-than-light drive to reach the nearest spaceport for repairs. The impossible had become reality through the application of controlled recklessness and human stubbornness. Marcus began the shutdown sequence for the Terran protocol override, carefully bringing the ship's systems back to normal operational parameters. The process was almost as dangerous as the activation had been, requiring precise timing to prevent catastrophic power fluctuations. But the human engineers had designed elegant solutions for this as well, gradually reducing power output while maintaining critical functions. As the ship's system stabilized, Marcus made his way back through the maintenance tunnels toward the main engineering section. His suit's radiation sensors showed that exposure levels were returning to acceptable ranges. The immediate crisis was over, but he knew that the real work was just beginning. The override system had saved their lives, but at the cost of significant damage to the ship's infrastructure. Marcus emerged from the restricted compartment to find the engineering bay filled with alien crew members staring at their instruments in amazement. The Corvani chief engineer, Vorthak, approached with an expression that Marcus had never seen before on the usually stoic being's face. It was something between respect and bewilderment. "Engineer Chen," Vorthak said slowly, "our analysis suggests that what just occurred was statistically impossible. The power levels we recorded exceed safe operational limits by margins that should have resulted in complete system failure." How did your species develop technology that operates beyond the boundaries of rational engineering? Marcus wiped the sweat from his face and considered the question. How could he explain to beings who had evolved to avoid risk that sometimes the only way forward was through controlled destruction? How could he make them understand that humans had reached the stars not despite their willingness to break things, but because of it? "We don't engineer for optimal conditions," Marcus finally replied. "We engineer for survival when everything goes wrong. Our technology isn't designed to operate perfectly under ideal circumstances. It's designed to keep working when perfect becomes impossible." The Zephyrian navigation officer, Commander Zileth, stepped forward with a datapad full of calculations. "The probability of successful activation of your emergency protocol was only 5% according to our models. How did you calculate the acceptable risk threshold for such a decision?" Marcus laughed, though he was too exhausted for it to carry much humor. "Commander, we didn't calculate anything. Sometimes humans just have to trust their instincts and hope for the best. We call it taking a leap of faith." The alien officers exchanged glances that spoke volumes about their inability to comprehend such an approach to crisis management. Their cultures had developed along different paths, emphasizing caution, calculation, and consensus. The idea of making life-or-death decisions based on intuition and stubborn optimism was fundamentally foreign to their way of thinking. Captain Thresk's voice came through the ship's intercom system, addressing the entire vessel. "All hands, this is the captain. Thanks to the actions of Engineer Chen and the implementation of emergency protocols designed by our human colleagues, we have successfully escaped immediate danger. We are proceeding to Kepler Station for repairs and will continue to our destination once the ship has been restored to full operational status." Marcus made his way to the bridge to file his incident report, knowing that the events of the past few hours would be studied and debated by xenobiologists and engineers throughout the Galactic Cooperation Council. The successful activation of the Terran Protocol override had demonstrated something important about human psychology and engineering philosophy. As he walked through the ship's corridors, Marcus passed groups of passengers and crew members from a dozen different worlds. They looked at him with expressions ranging from gratitude to amazement to something approaching fear. He had done what none of their species would have been capable of doing, not because of superior technology or intelligence, but because of a uniquely human willingness to embrace calculated chaos. The Harmony's Edge continued its journey toward Kepler Station, its human-modified systems having performed exactly as designed. In the face of impossible odds and certain death, human engineering and human courage had found a way forward. It was a reminder that sometimes the most important innovations came not from playing it safe, but from having the courage to flip the switch that everyone else was too afraid to touch. Marcus settled into his quarters, exhausted but satisfied. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new problems to solve, and new opportunities to demonstrate that sometimes the best solution was the one that conventional wisdom said was impossible. For now, though, he was content to rest in the knowledge that when it mattered most, human stubbornness and ingenuity had saved the day once again.